following is an HCPSS TV special presentation.
Hi, I'm Brian Bassett with the Howard County Public School System. Welcome to HCPSS Insight, a live opportunity for you to interact with school system representatives. Today we want to hear from you about the PARCC home reports that you recently received. PARCC is the assessment used by Maryland to meet the federal requirements outlined in the No Child Left Behind Act and was first administered last school year. Last year, we held 2 live panel sessions that provided an overview on PARCC and answered questions related to the test's content and how the test would be administered in our schools. Those sessions can still be found at the HCPSS website at www.hcpss.org and search using the term PARCC. Today's session is focused on deciphering the home reports and ways that parents can support their children at home in preparation for PARCC. This is a question and answer session in which you can submit your questions in a variety of ways. The first is by Twitter. Tweet your questions using the hashtag HCPSSinsight. And remember to include the hashtag on your tweet or it won't appear in our feed. The other way to submit a question is by emailing it to insight@hcpss.org. As questions are submitted, we will do our best to combine similar questions so we can cover as many as we possibly have time for. With me today are 3 district experts to answer your questions. Jennifer Novak, Acting Coordinator of Secondary Mathematics, Timothy Guy, Coordinator of Assessments, and Stephanie Milligan, Coordinator of Elementary Language Arts. Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today. Are we ready? Okay, let's get right into it. Tim, first let's just start with an overview. What are some of the changes that are being made to the second year of the PARCC assessment?
So the first year of the PARCC assessments, students participated in 2 segments called the PBA, the performance-based assessment, and the end-of-year assessment. And so there was an assessment window that started in March for that PBA portion, and then there was an assessment window that was in the April-May timeframe for the end-of-year, the EOY portion. Mm-hmm. The PARCC Consortium was able to combine those into one assessment window this year. So the assessment window this year runs from about mid-April until about the end of June that schools will be not the end of June, the beginning of June, where schools will be assessing students and it's one combined window. So the same types of questions, the same types of tasks, it's just a little bit of a compressed window. So they don't have to sit for 2 different segments. Within that window, they've also been able to reduce the testing time, so the average is about 60 to 90 minutes per grade level that students will be sitting less for the actual assessment. And they've been able to maintain the same validity of the test and the same construct that we would expect for the test, but able to compress it to that. So that's where we're at for this year. So we're expecting schools select their own schedules, but they'll start testing in about mid-April, and then they'll have that entire assessment window to assess their students in different grade levels.
Okay. We did have a few pre-submitted questions, and we will certainly get to those momentarily. But first, I'd just like to continue the broader overview of PARCC and where we are right now and where it's headed. So Stephanie, let's come to you. What is PARCC measuring?
PARCC is measuring how well our students are meeting the grade-specific content standards. It has replaced the MSA in grades 3 through 8, as well as the HSA in Algebra 1 and English 10. PARCC is aligned to what is currently happening in the classroom. So, when we receive the scores of the PARCC assessments, it really is a good measurement of how well the students are mastering those content standards.
And what have we seen in the results that came back from last year? When we talk about measuring those content standards, what are some of the things that perhaps we've seen in the results to validate that?
So the student results are broken down into 5 levels, so which we'll talk about when we get to the home reports a little bit later. But overall, we're seeing that students are, we have about 50% of our students that are meeting or exceeding the standards on average. It's a little lower in some grade levels, higher in other grade levels in different subject areas, but we're somewhere floating around the 50% mark for the district averages, which is above the state averages and above other PARCC consortium averages, but there's still a long way to go for us to make sure that all students are excelling within our classrooms.
What are the, there's different PARCC tests, right? There's geometry tests and English language arts literacy. Who's taking what?
So the tests for the grades 3 through 8 students, that's the federal mandated testing that we have to provide an English language arts and a mathematics assessment for all of those students for grades 3 through 8. And so we have an English language arts assessment and we have a math assessment for those. In the elementary level, there's a grade level English language arts and then there's a grade level math. The same thing is true in 6th grade. In 7th grade and 8th grade, some of our students that are advanced in mathematics are participating in high school level math courses, Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2. If they're taking a test that is aligned to those curriculum, then they actually will take that grade level PARCC, that high school level PARCC.
And that's different from last year?
Yes. Well, Algebra 1 and Algebra 2 did participate. Geometry is a new assessment that the PARCC Consortium is offering and that the state is also offering now. And so our students that are participating in geometry courses will be able to participate in geometry at the middle school level. At the high school level, we have 4 assessments that are potentially given. Algebra 1 and English 10 are required as graduation requirements by MSD. And then we have English 11, which we are looking into giving for a college and career readiness measure to figure out whether our students are prepared for college and career readiness. And then we have Algebra 2, which is given as another college and career readiness measure to determine whether students are ready to transition out to a credit-bearing course at the college level. So those are the testing requirements. We're not giving geometry at the high school level. And then when we're talking about our grades 6 through 8, I left out language arts. Language arts, they take the grade level assessments for 6th, 7th, and 8th. For grade, there's no advanced English that they have a different assessment. They always take the grade level standard. So that's the general rundown of who's taking what.
Okay, good. You know, one of the main points that we want to talk about today are the home reports. Sure. And lucky for me, I brought my home report. There it is. So if you've got this at home, pull it out. Let's start to go through this a little bit and talk about this. As more of these questions come in, you can make sure you submit your questions on Twitter using hashtag HCPSSinsight or email us at insight@hcpss.org, and we will certainly ask your questions on air to this panel of outstanding experts. But let's start to go through this. So maybe, Tim, you can walk us through, and we can start maybe with slide 2, and just start here at the top. And Stephanie and Jenny, please feel free to jump in, you know, what you see in these reports and what you're hearing from maybe the community from at home.
So parents got a report for whatever the assessment the student participated in, they got a report for. So there was an English language arts assessment and a mathematics assessment. So most students got 2 reports. A high school student that was just in English language arts grade 10 would only have gotten a grade 10 home report because they didn't take a math assessment during the high school year. They get a home report. The top of the home report looks like this in all of the subject areas.
And that's slide 2, if we can pull that up. Go ahead, keep going.
So the home report has kind of a sliding scale that they represent for parents, level 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And those levels are defined as level 1 is not yet meeting grade level expectations, level 2 is partially meeting those grade level expectations, level 3 is approaching grade level expectations, and level 4 is meeting grade level expectations, and then level 5 is exceeding. So level 4 and 5 are really where students are meeting or exceeding those expectations for the grade level. So the student is placed on that scale and they can see where their students, what's called a scale score is, and that scale score ranges from 650 to somewhere in the 800s. That the top score varies slightly depending on the grade level test. Below that sliding scale, parents will see a comparison of their students' scale score with the district, state, school, and PARCC average, just to see where their student compares in an average sense to the other participants. And then below that, I think then we have another slide for the lower level, which will.
Well, can we go back just one second? Let's stay here for 1 second. We don't need to stay on the slide if they want to get off of that. But how were these levels determined? What's college and career? And clearly you could see on that slide that the child's score was about midway through level 3. So clearly this child wasn't deemed college and career ready by PARCC. How's that determined? And do you see potentially any shift in that moving forward?
So the PARCC Consortium brings in experts, curriculum experts, teachers from all different states across the consortium, and they did the performance level setting. And that performance level setting had them look at everything from the questions that were given to students, how students performed on those questions. They compared it to other benchmark assessments like the OECD test for school. They looked at other assessment performance for students and really got a sense of where students were at based on a set of questions. And so that was done. Our state participated, all the states participated and sent representatives to do that performance level setting. There shouldn't be massive changes to the way the performance levels are set. There could be adjustments as they get multiple years of data and look and see where that college and career readiness piece, or the 4s and the 5s, them meeting the standards, it may need to adjust slightly. But overall, the plan is to have a comparable number so that the numbers mean the same each year, so that we have good data on students.
We had a question just come in from a parent. I think this is a good place to ask it before we move along in the report. And the question is how do the results, and I'll throw this out, whoever wants to tackle this, how do the results of advanced students, how are they taken into account? And perhaps that with placements, perhaps?
Okay, I guess I'll start and anyone can jump in too.
Sure.
So whether or not a student is above grade level or on grade level or what course they're in is not dependent. So when they're testing for a PARCC exam, it's based on the content that's in that course. So grades 3 through 6, they're getting the 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade content. And as Tim mentioned before, once a student enters for mathematics and Algebra 1, then they're getting tested on specific content for Algebra 1 or Geometry or Algebra 2. So whether or not a student is considered advanced or not, that doesn't have a bearing on how they performed on the content standards and what was assessed on the test. So it's not quite dependent.
So if I have a child that's in 6th grade and she's considered on grade level in all of her classes, and she scores in level 5, will that be taken into consideration by the school, and maybe she will be placed in higher level math class or whatever it is, or is this just an evaluation of what she's actually being taught? And so maybe it differs from students that are in higher level classes.
So we would say that the PARCC assessment is just one piece of data on a student. And so when we do placements or look at, interventions even, we're looking at multiple data points, not just PARCC.
Okay.
So we administer the MAP assessment in grades 1 through 8. We have a GT placement test called COGAT that's given in grades 3 and 5. We have multiple teacher-generated assessments throughout the school year. We have teacher observation. All of that is taken into account when we're talking about something like a placement request, or when we're looking at potential courses or course recommendations throughout a student's K-12 schooling. So all that, it's not just the PARCC assessment, and definitely in a first year when we administer an assessment, we expect that there's going to be it's the first time we've administered it. A lot of it is the focus is on just giving the test for the first time and getting through that piece. And now schools have the data and have actionable data to look at for improving their alignment to content standards. So we wouldn't take this year's assessment results and just make decisions on kids. That wouldn't be our practice in general, and we will always want to balance that out with all the data that we have on a student. But yes, it can be a factor for making a placement.
Okay. Another parent question. Did you have something?
I was
to add,
just
Stephanie?
going to remind the parents that on the score report,
Mm-hmm.
there actually is a statement at the top that talks about how this test is just one measure, and that students, daily instruction and grades and teacher feedback is more of an indicator of how well the students are doing on a daily basis and meeting the needs of their child.
Thank you. That's good to add. Another parent question that came in that I think relates to this conversation. It's about score range, and it looks like they'd like to know if you feel the score range could be adjusted next year. For example, the standard high score range is from about 800 to 850. Could that change? Could that come down? Could that move up to a higher number? And then this person says that they read that high school students will only take one test in high school because of the Every Child Succeeds law. Is that correct? So it sounds like there's two questions in there.
So I'll answer the second one first because that one's an easy one. The testing requirements for federal law for high school doesn't change too much actually under the new act. We still have an assessment requirement. Algebra 1 and English 10 actually fulfill those requirements, and so they still do. So Algebra 1 and English 10 were in place as HSAs. Now they've been replaced by PARCC, high school PARCC assessments. We have a requirement to test those students. That's how accountability is determined for those schools, the school performance as we're looking at that. The overall, the Algebra 2 and the English 11 that we're talking about, that is a separate Maryland-specific requirement that we are being asked to assess the students before the end of their 11th grade year to determine college and career readiness. And there are other measures that we can use, but right now the ones that are provided by the state are the PARCC assessments. Within those PARCC assessments, we would then determine college and career readiness and determine if there's additional supports that a student would need as they enter their senior year to then be able to transition from high school into a credit-bearing course at the college level. So to provide that transition component, that's the intentions of those other testing pieces. They're an end-of-course assessment. They're not a graduation requirement. They're an end-of-course assessment. So it's just how did you do against the standards. Very similar to the grades 3 through 8 assessments that we give. They're not graduation requirements, but they are an assessment that we give at the end of those courses.
And how about that score range? That was the first part of their question. Could that be altered slightly by the PARCC consortium?
The score range, like I said, earlier, I don't believe that we'll see a huge amount of shifting, but things could change in those upper levels, the 4s and the 5s, because you'll see that grade level to grade level, that those score ranges are slightly different. I can't really speak for the PARCC consortium on decisions for this coming school year, but I would imagine as we get additional data, the larger the data pool, the more accuracy that they'd have for that, and the performance level setting. But I think it's the intention to keep the numbers comparable so that the numbers mean the same thing as we go year to year. Okay. Definitely with the performance levels themselves.
So let's go back to the home report. And I think Jenny's been trying to hide down here on the end. So let's try to bring Jenny into the conversation. And Mike, maybe you can bring up slide 4. And Jenny, maybe you can talk us through just a little bit about the bottom of page 1 and what we're seeing in slide 4. What is this telling parents?
Sure. So I think one of the most exciting parts about the home report for PARCC compared to what we would have in a traditional MSA report, as opposed to just having a score that didn't really mean anything to families, we now have some more information about how the student performed in specific areas. So at the top of the form, you have the score and then how the student compared to the state and the district and the PARCC consortium. But now, when you look at the bottom part of the report, you can start to see what the test measured, what specific categories were assessed, and then how the student did in relation to each of the categories. And so I'll talk about math, and I'm sure Stephanie's going to talk about the English language. So for all of the mathematics tests, regardless of grade level or course, there are 4 main categories. There's one that's called major content, one that's called additional and supporting content, and then there's a category for expressing mathematical reasoning, and then modeling and application. And underneath that, you'll see a diagram that has arrows or squiggly marks that kind of indicate how the student did. So if you have the up arrow, that means that student was performing very well in that subset of content that was assessed. If they're the lines that are kind of going side by side, that means they were performing at or around where a typical student was performing. And then if you see an arrow down, that's an indication of this was an area that the student did not perform as well. And so that's kind of an area to tune into.
But as a parent, how do I know what major content is and what's modeling an application?
Right, so for mathematics, one of the things, resources that we provide for you, we have a Family Math Weebly. The website is on slide 1, if you want to pull that up.
It's coming.
That's
Keep
coming.
going.
Okay, so if you go to the second website on here, the HCPSS Family Math Weebly, there's a drop down for PARCC on that website, and then from there we have the different grade bands. So we have the elementary content and what's considered major versus supporting content. We have the middle school grade bands, what's considered major versus supporting content. So there's descriptions in there, and then we also have it for the high school courses as well, so for algebra, geometry, algebra 2. So if a parent is looking for, well, what specifically my child didn't do well in the major content, what does that mean for that course? Right. Well, they could go down. So let's say they went to a drop down for grade 3. If they were looking at grade 3, they would see some of the topics that are in major content are things like multiplication and division, understanding fractions as numbers, and there's also some measurement and area standards. If they look at grade 6, they're going to see some of the major content would include things like using ratios to solve problems, having a deep understanding of rational numbers and operations with fractions. And then there's a whole algebraic expressions piece and solving equations and inequalities. So if you're trying to think about how to support your child or just have a better understanding of where that content is, use the Weebly and you can easily access what the content is for that course.
Sounds easy. Sounds like I could do it. All right, Stephanie. So if we go to slide 3, we're going to see sort of the reading and the writing breakdowns, of the report.
So just like Jenny was sharing with mathematics, there are 2 categories for language arts. There's reading and writing. And under those different categories, you can scroll down to see a skill subset. For language arts, literary text, in reading, informational text and vocabulary are the skill subsets. And really, when you're looking at the arrows and whether that's an up arrow, down arrow, or an arrow that's going to the side, you're thinking about how well your students or your child is reading and comprehending those different types of text. So literary text would be poetry and dramas and short stories. With informational text, it would be more like articles or research studies. Within the PARCC assessment, though, sometimes students are not necessarily reading the text. They're watching short clips, short videos, listening to audio tapes. So the listening and speaking standards are embedded in those experiences. And then finally under reading, we have a subset for vocabulary. And it's measuring how well students understand academic vocabulary, how well they're able to use context to identify unknown words. On the others category, it's really looking at writing, and written expression is the first subset. And if you think about how students are organizing their writing, the word choice that they're using, whether they're selecting evidence from the text that they read to make their writing much more clear, that's part of written expression. And then finally, the knowledge and use of language conventions, and that's really the grammar, spelling, capitalization, punctuation, how they're actually applying those skills while they're writing. So, you know, when we're looking at the score report, it gives us an indication of whether the students are actually meeting the expectation at their grade level, or working towards it, or maybe need some extra assistance and some extra practice with those different areas.
Now, recognizing that we have 1 year of data points so far with PARCC, I'll ask this question.
Okay.
Are we seeing that if a student struggles in the day-to-day assessments that teachers are always evaluating, say with vocabulary, are we seeing that PARCC is also showing that? Are we seeing that those assessments are lining up so far this year? Again, 1 year of data points. But are they being accurately represented to what we're seeing every day?
Some parts are, you know, I think that it's really good that you brought that up, because if you have a child, if I was the parent of a child that is doing really well in writing and in reading instruction, and all of her grades are very strong, and daily data that's coming home, daily grades that are coming home look very, very strong. And then you receive your PARCC scores, and they may not replicate that same. We have to always remember this is a baseline.
Right.
And for many students, especially third graders, this is the very first time that they ever experienced an assessment like this. So we need to take that into account. But that would be a great way to open a communication conversation with teachers, you know, where they actually see their child, and maybe some things that they can do at home to help bring their achievement up a little bit.
And that's a great point. And maybe both of you can talk about this. What are we asking? Parents have received this. What are we asking them to do now that they've been armed with this, along with everything else that we've given them? What's the action item? What do we want parents to do at this point?
Well, in the area of language arts, the first thing that I would think about is really looking at reading and the types of text that students are exposed to, and thinking about, does your child read at home? Do they like to read? What are they interested in? You know, we need our students to be reading often and reading different types of text. So, you know, if you look at the score report and there's an indication that maybe literary text is not as strong as informational text, then there needs to be a conversation with your child about how much do you read as far as novels and short stories? Do you enjoy that type of text? And how can you engage your child into reading more of that type of text? So I think that as a parent, I would look at the score report and really think about where your child's needs are during the from day to day.
Same on the math side?
Sure, no problem. I like to think about the PARCC report, and I have a young child, as kind of that annual checkup. You know, so if you go to the doctor's office and you think about, all right, let me see how my child's doing with his height, with his weight, all of those things, is just kind of where is my child in terms of his progress. So if I think about that in terms of PARCC and this assessment, in this report, how is my child doing in terms of what content they had at this grade level, and are they performing well? Is there some areas that we should start to tune in on? And as you said before, right now we're just at a first year baseline. We're just getting some initial information. So is that performance happening every year as I start to get more information? Is there certain areas that I can talk to the teacher about to see what supports they're giving in the classroom, especially when I think about the expressing mathematical reasoning and the modeling and application. How is my child doing with real world problems? So if I give them a novel problem that's not just straight rote mathematics, are they able to make sense of the problem? Are they able to come up with a strategy to solve the problem? Are they able to talk about it and explain what their strategy is? Can they explain why they're doing the math that they're doing and what that means? And all of that, by just asking some simple questions, you can start to see where the child may be strong, or what are some areas that you can communicate with the teacher about to help them.
I have a third grader that will be taking it for the first time this year, and I have a sixth grader that took it last year, and I like the approach of looking at it as an annual checkup. I'm glad you said that. That's a good way to look at it. But the only place where I'll challenge that is when the phrase graduation requirement pops up, right?
Right.
So how about those parents? We've got some high school parents, and the score is a little more important, right? So what are we asking them to do?
So the first 2 years, so last year was the first year of the operational assessment. We had a year of field testing the year before that that was at certain buildings, but last year was the first operational year of the assessment. The state has changed the Maryland regulations to allow for 2 years of basically students being exempt from passing the assessment for 2 years. So this last year and then this current year that we're in currently, any student that's in the assessed courses for high school courses do not have to pass the assessment, but they must participate in the assessment. So any score will count as a graduation requirement for English 10, Algebra 1, at the high school level for the PARCC assessments. So the other high school assessments are still there and still in play. The biology assessment and the government HSA are both still also graduation requirements, but for the PARCC assessments, they've been given these 2 years of leadway. Okay. So oftentimes parents will ask, well, does that mean then after next school year they'll have to sit again to pass it? No, it was at the time that they took the course. So whenever they pass the course, they sit for the assessment, and that's when the requirement is determined. So if they were in the course last year or this year for Algebra 1 or English 10, they just had to sit for the assessment. and that fulfill the graduation requirement. Any student that is in the class next year or passes the class next year, next school year, will have to actually pass the PARCC assessment as well.
What's pass?
So we don't know yet.
Okay.
The state is setting those pass scores now. So that's one of the reasons that they gave us 2 years, because they needed time to actually set a pass threshold for students, and that's supposed to be done in basically between now and the spring. So once we know that pass score, we'll have a better idea of how many of our students would have actually passed, because the state may choose to do something that isn't the 4s and the meets and exceeds. They may do something below that. We don't know. But when that pass score is set, if students are participating next year and don't pass, it'll be very similar to our high school assessments, where if they don't pass multiple times, twice, then they're able to participate in an alternate pathway, which is we call the bridge projects, which is it's a way for them to fulfill the assessment requirement without necessarily passing the assessment, because we know that some of our students are not successful in a testing scenario. So that's pretty much the way that the high school requirements will work. It's also important to point out, as we were talking a minute ago, about the timeline for parents getting the reports back. This first year, all that work that had to go into setting these levels occurred over the summer, so there's a delay in getting the score reports back. So the score reports didn't come until December. That's, we're basically halfway through the school year, and the score reports are arriving.
Tim, you're jumping the gun. I've got
sorry.
a question from a parent. I want to ask their question. Let me ask their question, Tim. Here we go. It's right there. It's a tough question. You probably don't know what's coming. Going forward, what do you anticipate the turnaround time will be for the report following the test?
So in future years,
thanks for letting me do that.
There's a 4-week turnaround after the students assess on the initial data that we'll get back as a school system. The printed reports will most likely come to parents when they return to school the next year, because so we leave the school, they take the assessment in May and June basically. They assess during that period of time. We get the assessment results back in like mid-June, and then the printed copies of the reports will probably be a month or so after that, like the actual processing time for all that. Then we'll get those reports to the parents most likely as they enter the school the following year, because of the fact that we don't want to mail all these reports home, and they may not be delivered until right before the school year starts anyway. So it should be right at the start of school for the next year. So then the teachers have information on their students that are coming in before they've even seen them. They've got some ideas, and schools have an opportunity over the summer to do school improvement planning. So, our students were weak in these areas. We need to adjust we need to talk to this group of teachers. We need to talk to this, team and talk about what we're going to do to support those students and what are we doing differently, talking to other schools about what they're doing, working with curricular offices to see, where our successes are, so that we can, hone in on what we want to improve upon, and then to have all that data available to teachers when they return to school. So that's the intention, is that we'll have the results back before students enter the school, but also that we'll have them back early summer for school improvement pieces for schools. So about 4 weeks is what the estimates are.
If you want to get in on this discussion, make sure you tweet us using hashtag HCPSSinsight, or email us at insight@hcpss.org. Tim, do you foresee schools using PARCC, if they're receiving the scores in the summer, do you foresee them using PARCC results for placement?
As I said before, I just see it as one piece of that. And the placement discussions actually occur during the school year because of the scheduling requirements for the schools, for personnel and other things like that. They occur much earlier than that. Okay. So the PARCC information can be, like I said, one of the things that we look at, but it's not the be-all, end-all of what we're looking at. And it's also not the only thing for school improvement planning as well. Everything doesn't depend on this test. We have local assessments, we have at the high school level PSAT, SAT data, ACT data. There's many data points that we have that this is included in, but that also inform our discussions and our decisions.
Yes?
And to piggyback on what Tim was saying, as far as placement of students, that articulation process starts very early in the school year. It's actually getting ready to start for middle school and high school very soon. So, and when we're looking at elementary, there's an articulation day that teachers actually sit and talk to the next grade level and share student data as well as recommendations for class lists. And even though the class lists aren't posted until the beginning of the school year, that discussion happens way before the lists are posted on the windows of the school.
Okay, good, thank you.
And it's important to understand that that's not a lock-in decision either. There's decisions made and changes made
fluid.
throughout that. It's fluid.
Exactly.
And definitely with input from parents and
Yes.
good decisions are made. So.
Jenny,
Yes.
are there practice tests available for parents?
There are, and there's a few ways to access them. If you go directly to parkonline.org,
parkonline.org?
parkonline.org, and then there's an assessments tab, and then you can go from there. It says take the practice assessments. We also have them linked on the Family Math Support Center Weebly that we talked about earlier. So if you go on there, it has PARCC assessments, and then in one of the drop downs, it has you direct link to some practice tests as well. It takes you to the same place. And then also through the HCPSS.org, if you go to /testing.
Slide 6.
Slide 6.
Oh, slide 6.
Slide 6,
Slide
there you go.
6. Thank you, Tim.
So if you look at the HCPSS.org website for testing, here you can find information about all of the tests that are administrated through HCPSS, including PARCC. And when you click on PARCC assessments, there's a lot of resources that talk about all kinds of things, from accommodations and what the test is about and when the test is administered. And then also links directly to the online practice tests as well, so you can get a sampling of what the questions tend to look like.
And this webpage right there is also where you can find today's session. It will live on forever on our PARCC page, and the first two we did last year as well.
Okay.
So this is an interesting question that just came in, and I'm not sure if it's a comment or a question. But last year, the HCPSS launched a new learning management system called Canvas that the parents and students and staff are enjoying. And the question is, in the future, will the reports be incorporated into Canvas? Has there been any discussion about that, or is that just something we can take back and consider?
So we have talked about that for lots of different things that we deliver. But there are some concerns with how the reports are delivered to us and how the digital versions of them, and how we would then share those with students or parents within an online system. So we're not there yet, I would say, for actual delivery in that fashion, just because of the nature of the way the things are put together and organized. And also we have to look at the technical requirements and what parents have access and pieces like that to make sure that the formal document gets to them, because we have a requirement to share the results with those parents. So we're a little ways out.
It's on the radar.
It's on the radar,
Being
definitely.
considered.
Yes.
So, okay, good.
Definitely.
Tim, are there any costs associated with PARCC that Howard County picks up?
So the PARCC assessments are paid for by the state, by MSDE. So the scoring, the materials, the software, any components like that are paid for by the state. The costs that we have are costs for like materials for scrap paper, copies of the testing tickets that we use to get students logged in. So they're kind of built-in costs into things that we're already doing. They're not like a direct cost for assessment. For instance, headphones. The headphones have other uses, but we need headphones to administer the assessment. So those things are a lot of times in place, or we're able to supplement things that buildings are already doing and provide the extra piece to then get them to what they need. Same thing with computers. To assess a large group of students, we have to have computers, but we don't buy computers for assessment. We buy computers for instruction, and then we use those instructional computers for assessment. Okay. So we wouldn't go and buy computers just because we need them for a specific test. We would say we need these for instructional purposes, which is the better use.
Okay.
So,
good.
But there's no direct cost to the school system as far as PARCC is concerned.
Why are states releasing information at different times?
So the PARCC consortium, the different states went about this in completely different ways. So Maryland chose, we had some districts that gave paper only in Maryland, because we were given a year to kind of get some some districts have low computer allotments and weren't able to give the assessment online effectively. So they gave paper assessments, which delayed the reception of the actual results by MSDE, by Maryland State Department of Education. And then they have to present that to their board. The way we work is that we present that to our state board, and then after it's presented to the state board, then that data is released to the counties. Other states have different policies and different procedures, and they released it as it came in, or they released partial data. They released their online data and didn't wait until they got all the paper and the online together. Maryland chose to wait and have all of the data available, and then present that to the state board and then release that to the districts. So we were one of the later states to report, but we did it purposefully so that all the data was present and that we had a true perspective on how the state was doing as a whole, as opposed to the trickle-in of what was occurring.
And I just want to make sure that that's a state decision, and
all
of the counties within Maryland were on the same time schedule.
Yeah, and everybody's home reports went home at different times, very similar to like a report card. Our report card schedules are a little different depending on our school schedules. So for our grades 3 through 8, we included those with progress reports. They were released on the 8th. We distributed them on the 10th of December. That just lined up really nicely. Another district might have waited until the 15th of December because of the fact that they had something going home at that time. So there wasn't a requirement that that every report went home on the same day, but the data was released to mdreportcard.org rather. That information was all released to the public at that time and to the press, all at the same schedule. Yes.
Stephanie.
Sure.
I'm going to ask this question as it was written by a parent. It's lengthy, so bear with me. Henry's PARCC scores show that language conventions is his weakest area. He met expectations in all other areas of language arts except that. Is there a way that our teachers can work in the classroom to help teach him this material? This person says they've noticed that their school doesn't directly teach these topics anymore, and children are expected to pick it up through their writing, and that approach doesn't seem to be working for their child. Is there anything that we can do in the classroom, they're asking, or that the parent can do at home?
That's a very good question, and I'm glad it was asked. The first thing that I want to talk about is the misconception that we are not teaching the language standards. We are teaching grammar and spelling, and our standards dictate that we need to teach these skills at each grade level. And they change as the students move up through the grade levels. The complexity of instruction is more meaty as far as expectations with conventions. As far as teaching it in writing, she's absolutely right. Our language standards are embedded into our writing instruction. And if you think back, and probably all of us that are sitting here today, the way that we learned about grammar and spelling is, with grammar we did worksheets, and we practiced on made-up sentences that weren't our own, and we applied those skills on that worksheet. As well as spelling, we got a list of 25 words at the beginning of the week. We studied them all week long, and we took a test on Friday. And we know, and research is showing, that process doesn't transfer into actual writing for most students. So we have embedded our language standards, the practice of usage of words, capitalization, punctuation, and spelling into our writing curriculum. That's the authentic way to show what they know as far as that's concerned. One of the things that we've been talking about, and since the PARCC scores have been released, we've already started looking at instruction, and we've started having conversations with teachers around, what is actually happening in classrooms, what needs to increase, what ways we can change our curriculum to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all students. So we've talked a lot about the writing knowledge of use of language conventions. We've talked a lot about that. And one part of our writing instructional model, we have students actually make agreements that they've learned through many lessons, certain editing expectations, that we put a capital letter at the beginning of a sentence. We use commas in a series because of certain indicators. We spell words correctly that we know. those editing expectations, we ask teachers to post them and have students agree to them, and then we hold students accountable. Because one thing that we want our students to do is not just to edit work that's going to be published, but we need students to understand that we edit our writing for our readers, and sometimes our readers are ourselves. So we always need to be editing as we're writing, and developing those skills in kindergarten. You know, you always put a capital letter at the beginning of a sentence, you always put a period at the end. So the reader understands where your thought begins and ends. So that needs to continue in every writing experience that a child has. So when they come to PARCC and any other assessment, it's a habit. They're already applying those skills that they've learned, but maybe they're not putting in place in an environment that they feel like there's not a reader that they need to be mindful of.
And the second part of that question is, how can parents then take that and translate it seamlessly to supporting the child at home, and what resources are available?
Absolutely. I think the first resource that I would ask parents to look at is, we have a website, the Language Arts website, and I think it's the very last slide.
Yeah, slide number 8.
There's some resources on there that will help parents understand the standards for the expectations at grade level. Because first we need to make sure that we're holding students accountable for the standards at their grade level, and that we shouldn't be expecting students to apply skills that they've never been taught. So that would be the first thing that I would do. The second thing is actually having your child write, and for an authentic reason. You know, writing a list, writing a note or an email to a grandparent, and making sure that as they're writing, they're mindful of applying those skills. You know, that authentic practice is what's going to move our students forward. So even though I'm sure publishing companies wouldn't appreciate me saying this, but buying a workbook and working your way through a workbook is not nearly as effective as just having your students write, and write often.
The authenticity.
Authenticity, both with reading and writing.
Good.
Right.
Okay, we're jumping around a little bit. So we had it sounds like, I'm coming back to Tim. I was looking at Tim. That was the hint, Tim. It was coming to you. First, this parent says, thank you for answering my question. So, but we're going back to the timing of the reports. Could any consideration be given to getting the reports in parents' hands by the end of June or by mid-July? And here's why. They say that having that information during the summer break would be of great value to parents because it's an opportunity to work on areas of weakness. Our child has made huge strides over each summer with the work that we have given them during that time frame.
So that's good feedback, and so we'll do everything that we can to get them home as early as we can. So we do know the only thing that we have locked in is that the state has told us that it'll be 4 weeks for the digital information. So we don't have a timeline yet on when the paper reports are received, but we may be able to work away within the student information system or the Canvas system where we could at least display the student score and how they did on the subtest. Maybe not the full paper report that they're expecting to receive, but at the very least their performance levels, because that information will be loaded into those systems so that for graduation requirement purposes and other purposes, for school improvement planning, et cetera. So hopefully we can figure out a way to get that parent facing as well, because the system's already designed to do all that. So we should be able to do something like that for parents. So it's good.
We're on the home stretch. If you want to get your question in, do it quickly. Hashtag HCPSS Insight on Twitter, or insight@hcpss.org if you'd like to email it. If we end the session and we don't answer your question, you can still contact us through those methods, and we'll get back. We'll get you a response. Okay. Looking forward, when some of these PARCC tests become a graduation requirement, if a child doesn't score well, will they have opportunities to retake PARCC?
Yes. So currently, the PARCC assessment is only being offered in our district right now this year in the spring. So there's only a spring administration. In future years, there'll be a fall administration. And so after next year, when it's a passing requirement, there would be a fall administration and a spring administration. The fall administration would be for students that were not successful in the spring of the previous year. So if students failed the assessment for high school, this is only for high school graduation requirements, if they were not successful in the assessment, then we would give them an opportunity to test again in the fall. And then after that fall, if they failed a second time, then we would look at, and when I say they would sit for the assessment, our high schools take those students and put them in to support programs so that they can perform better, because there's gaps in their knowledge if they're not performing well on the assessment. And so they would be part of those courses, or sometimes it's a pull-out of other courses, but they would participate in some type of intervention process to then prepare themselves for sitting for the assessment a second time. Then they would sit for that assessment the second time in the fall. It's really winter. It's more like December, January timeframe. And then if they failed that second time, then we would work to getting them through a bridge process. So the school would work with the students on identifying a project, and these are all set out by MSD. We don't know what those look like yet for PARCC, because we were 2 years out from students really being in a second failure scenario, which we hope to have small percentages of students that are not successful. But if they aren't successful, then what the state would then have a bridge project set up for us, and then that would be what the student would work through to then fulfill the assessment requirement.
For the younger students, let's say 3 through 7, 3 through 8, grades 3 through 8, what would we be looking at as educators if we find a student that maybe performed in level 4 one year and level 3 the next? What would that tell us?
So each test is specific to the content within that course, but there is some content in each test that builds on prior learning. So it's not like every course is completely independent of skills. So you think about elementary grades, they're building number sense really strongly. They're building fluency with multiplication, division, and the basic the operations and what that means in terms of number. When you get to middle school, they're building on the idea of extending the idea of number system and starting to get to more abstract representations with it as well. So some of that score, if a student is starting to not perform as well as they did the previous year, we would want to look at the sub-score and say, or what's the areas that they're not being as successful with, and is it the new content, or is it something that they struggled with before and now they're having even more difficulty with. So starting to diagnose the problem a little bit more clearly. One of the things that I don't think we've talked about at all today is soon we're going to be getting information from PARCC. Teachers and schools will be getting information that will provide us with item analysis as well. And so we're going to be able to look at a much smaller grain size of how our students are doing. So not only are we going to just have a number, all right, and a proficiency band, but we're also going to have information about how our students did on types of questions. And so if we can see that student A didn't do well in all of the areas dealing with solving equations, we now have a roadmap to support them through our in-class supports, and then potentially through our after-school or during the school day interventions that we offer as well. So as we get more information and we start to build this profile of our students, we're going to know how to target our instruction and our support for them much more clearly than we ever really have.
Now, how do we handle a situation where, because students are going to be responsible for knowing content from previous years, correct?
Sure.
So how do we handle a situation where maybe they're lacking from a previous year and it's affecting them down the road? How do we support that?
Well, we currently have a system in place for that. We have interventions that students will receive to help bring them up to the content level that they are in. In the elementary grades, students receive interventions from reading specialists in the area of language arts, as well as in some schools they have extra support through Title I teachers. So interventions are put in place currently. Classroom teachers put in interventions in place also. Okay. They work with students individually or in a small group to build those skills that the student needs in order to move forward. So I don't want to give the impression that we have to have an outside teacher provide that support, Classroom teachers are very skilled at differentiating instruction and making sure that all students in their classroom, they're meeting the needs of every single student and moving them forward. So
They're our key, right?
They are our key.
Our greatest tool.
They really are.
The other important piece is that we also have them, we give the MAP assessments in grades 1 through 8, and that provides us with, instead of just an end of the year like PARCC, where we're really just doing like that doctor's checkup at the end of the year kind of set up, we're getting check-ins throughout the year and seeing where the students are at. And the MAP assessment doesn't just assess the grade level standards, it's aligned to our standards, but it will also look at if a student isn't performing on their grade level standards, where are they at? And it'll basically look at, okay, well, they're in really the last grade level standards and there's some gaps. And so it gives the teachers some additional data on where a student is landing, as opposed to just looking at the overall standards for that year and how they performed.
Speaking of how they performed, how did we perform? How did Howard County perform, comparable to other districts or states?
So we just have initial preliminary data, the mdreportcard.org data, the parents and community can go and look at the overall performance of each school in the school system. On average, we outperformed the state averages and the PARCC averages, and compared to other surrounding districts, we performed well. So we did well on the overall assessment. Now, when I say did well, that means did well in comparison to others. There's still a lot of room to grow as far as students that are meeting or exceeding the standards. And we also haven't been given what is the proficiency level from the state. So what's the pass score for each area? We don't have that information yet. So what we're really aiming our sights at, though, are those 4s and 5s, the meeting and exceeding standards. And we are, like I said, sitting at about 50% on average, depending on the grade level and the tests and everything else, about 50% of the students that are meeting or exceeding the standards in the 2 subject areas. So that's, there's a significant number of our students that are sitting really close in the 3s, the level 3, but the 4s and 5s we're only at about 50%. But that's very good compared to some surrounding areas. So it's a good baseline, and that's what's important, is to understand this as baseline data, and that we know whenever the assessment systems are changed, and we've had a curriculum change, and this is the first assessment that we've had aligned completely to those grade level standards since the change. And so we're seeing some of those gaps that, there's some room for improvement in teaching the standards and building that into our professional practices in the classrooms. So.
Well, before I close us out, is there anything else anybody would like to add? Did we miss anything? I think we got in all the parent questions. Is there? Yeah. We good? Everybody happy? Tim?
We're good.
Nothing else?
We are.
All right. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
This was fantastic, and I think you provided a lot of insight, just not only into the reports, but what parents can expect moving forward, and again, how to support their children at home, because as parents, that's what we.
Most important job.
That's it. That's right. And that's all of the questions that we have time for today. First, I'd like to thank all of you who joined us and submitted a question. I'd also like to thank our panel of Jenny, Tim, and Stephanie for taking the time to ensure that our community has the information that it needs and an overall better understanding of the PARCC home reports and ways to prepare our students in the test's second year. Finally, thank you to the outstanding team of people we have working here behind the scenes of HCPSS Insight. So on behalf of Jennifer Novak, Tim Guy, and Stephanie Milligan, and everybody that participated on HCPSS Insight, I'm Brian Bassett. Thanks for joining us.